So today we're going to move back into Rhino. So we did a day of V-Ray. We're going back into Rhino. But you'll see at the very end today, I say, hey, don't forget to put a material on it, set up a scene, and do a quick render. So from now on, it's less likely that you're going to turn in screen captures and more likely that you'll be turning in renders. But occasionally, some screen captures. So today, I'm going to start teaching you to build a more complex object. And we're going to work our way through complex objects, kind of building up as we go forward in the class. And when it comes to exercises like this, as much as I would like to let you be inventive and creative and whatever, there's a certain set of you need to work through. And because of that, it's very scripted. So what you're going to build, what everybody else is going to build, it means that you write comments, which is good, but it's still kind of scripted. So I apologize for that, but it's kind of the techniques in of skills over the next couple days in class. So what I pulled up, I went ahead and I pulled up the exercise 5 handout, which is the same as got. The only difference is and so I've gone ahead and I've opened and I'm going to start in the top. And so this is a good refresher on system. It's right underneath the arrow. And I'm going to start right at the origin at 0, 0. So I'll go ahead and type in 0, 0, followed by the enter sign, and that's going to let me start drawing. I'm going to turn on ortho so that I'm maintaining my 90-degree angle here. And I'll go ahead and type the distance that is the height of one of these sides here. So that's 36. Ask me which direction do I has a little bit of a slope here. Let me turn on my snaps here. I could draw down by the 36, and then I could draw over by 2 inches, and then I could come back and I could draw from here to there, and an awful lot of work. Turned off my OpenGL, so hold on a second. There we go. Now I'll be able to see everything. So here, using those relative coordinates, I would type in the @ sign first, and this would be at -2, -36, and I can create that without having to do any slides or anything. It's a bit easier to go ahead and establish that. I'm going to go down by 6 inches now. There we go, straight down. Here's another opportunity for that relative coordinate. I'll start with the @ sign here. And this will be at 30 inches, comma, -6 inches. And that gets me down to the base of this shape. We'll go over again. So I'll do at 30. This time it's comma 6 inches because it's positive. I'm going back up. We will go at, what is it, -2, 36. Oops. Sorry about that. At -2, comma 36. There it is. We'll go over by 4 inches. To right there. Actually, I'm going to, no, I'll come all the way back across to right there. Perfect. And that then gives me this little hard. Join that shape together. So I'll type in join. I could alternatively go up to edit. I'll switch out of the top view and into the perspective view now. And now that I have this shape, I want to start thinking of it in 3 dimensions. So I'm going to rotate that shape up in the 3rd dimension. I'm going to use the rotate 3D command. We've moved on to step 2 today. I'll use rotate 3D. These are all review. I'm going to go up to transform, rotate 3D. The object that I want to rotate, I just drew. I'll press enter. Now remember, the rotation axis is the line around which I want to rotate. So if I want to stand this up vertically, the line around which I want to rotate would be from here to there. And then my reference point would be going right up this side, and I'll have it jump into its 3D position like that. So one more time, it's the rotate 3D. I'll go to transform, rotate 3D. My axis of rotation is going to be right here. My reference is going to be going up this side, and I'll fold it up so that it's standing up like that. Perfect. So now that I have that, I'm going to use the offset command, which again you've used before. So I'll go up to curve, offset, offset curve. And so you'll see right now that when I go to do the offset, see how it's in the plane of the curve as opposed to going back in space? I have the ability here in an option. It says in C-plane, no. I can choose in C-plane, yes, and it's now going back. You guys see the difference there? Let me make it a little bit larger so that maybe you can see it. Let me change my distance to 48. And so in this scenario, it's going back by 48. If in C-plane, it's going out. So I'm choosing which way I want it to, the offset to happen. So I want to make sure in C-plane is set to yes, and I get my second copy. The alternative, of course, instead of using the offset command, would be to take this and to go to copy. So let me go to transform and then copy. Base point would be right here, and I'll move it over by 4 feet. It's right there. So alternative ways of doing the same thing. It doesn't matter how you create it. It's just another. So the 3-dimensional shape that I'm ultimately going to have. And so what I need to do is I need to be able to fill in with some solid surfaces. I'll go ahead and go to, I have options here. I'll go into my surfaces, and I could do rectangle corner to corner, and I could say, okay, well, that's now a surface. And I could see that surface by going into shaded mode, and there it is. That's a lot of work to do that individually. So instead, I'm going to use the loft command. So I'll go up to surface and then loft. It's going to ask me to select curves to loft together. I'm going to select this curve and this curve. And I'll go ahead and I'll press enter. Now when that happens, you'll see the start of the loft. And so it's starting right at that point and right at that point, and it's going to go in this direction, which is fine. When I press enter, you'll see that it will actually go through and make that set of shapes, or those set of solids, which is what I want. Now, if I went and did that loft again, and say this point was down here, when I went and did the loft, the whole thing would twist instead, because it would start connecting this point to that point. You guys see how that changes the shape a lot? Likewise, if I went back and I did the loft again, and I flipped See if it's even going to let me do it. There we go. And I flipped the direction of the arrows, and I went enter. It's going to completely self-intersect because they're going the opposite direction. So I need to pay a lot of attention to how I loft these two shapes together. The good news is Rhino knows, for the most part, by default, that I want to be at the same point going the same direction. So it's not too hard to get a good result. And I'll go ahead and say OK. Now these lines on the outside were continuous closed curves where they were all joined together. Sometimes you have curves where they're exploded. So in this scenario, I have separate curves. I could go through and manually do this to this and then loft. I'm sorry. There we go. And then pick the next set of curves there and loft those together. And pick the next set of curves there and there. You guys get the idea. That's a lot of work too. So doing it as a join first, so I could take these two, go back to join, two closed curves, then I could take those two and loft. That's a little bit more efficient. Now when it comes to putting the surfaces on the ends of this shape, I'm going to be very careful with how I create these surfaces because of how we're going to match up the edges a little bit later. So I'm actually going to use this surface from 3 or 4 corner points a lot, which is that tool right there. And I'm going to fill in 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I'm filling in just that piece, and I'm ending right there, so it's straight across. Likewise, I'm going to fill in 1, 2, and 3, and I'll end right there. So I'm not picking a 4th point there, just 3 points. I'll repeat that process over here. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I'll repeat it again. By the way, if you are in a command, you finish a command, and you want to repeat the last command, you can right-click, and it'll automatically repeat the last command. I'll go 1, 2, and 3. Press enter. Now I've filled that in as well, which leaves me just this piece to fill in. So in this scenario, I could split this. I could go 1. Let me snap right to the middle of this, there, and there. That's fine. And we'll come back and we'll do it from there, 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 and there. Now the only potential problem with that is if I wanted to chamfer, and we're going to go through that, this surface here to this surface here. There's going to be a problem there. But we're not going to end up chamfering that, so it'll end up being just fine. So I've done all of these surfaces here. I need the surfaces on the back side. So I can go ahead and I can select all of them. I'm going to hold down Shift and select each of these pieces. And we'll just copy them to the back. So I'll go to Transform, Copy, and we'll move it from here back to there. And so when I'm done, that gives me surfaces all the way around. So it's a nice solid object, which is what we're after. So at this point, we want to add some detail to this shape. And so this is meant to be like a piece of a concrete bridge, like one of those walkways that goes over a freeway or something. And typically when you have this kind of a concrete pour, you're going to want joints between these segments. And there's usually a bevel at the joint. So there's a little bit of a chamfer. And so we're going to go through and we're going to chamfer these surfaces together. So I'm going to use a command called Chamfer Surface. It's under Surface and then Chamfer Surfaces. If you're going to type it in, it's Chamfer SRF for Chamfer Surface. And it's going to ask me to select first surface to chamfer. I'm going to pick this surface, select second surface to chamfer. It'll be that surface. Now in this scenario, my chamfer was too big. It ended up being really big. So I'm going to undo for a second, and I'm going to go back to that Chamfer Surface command. So I'll go to Surface, Chamfer Surfaces, and I'm going to pay attention here to distances. My distance is going to be a 1/2 inch and a 1/2 inch instead of 1 inch. Then I'll go back and pick this surface, and that looks much better. I'm going to do the chamfer again between these two surfaces. So I'll right-click, and I'll chamfer from here to there. That's good. Now I'm going to chamfer from here to here. See how this is starting to go together. And I'm also going to chamfer from here to there. And from there to there. So if we look carefully at this corner here, there's a bunch of overlapping pieces that's not very clean just yet. So we're going to have to go in and clean that. But since I'm doing the chamfer, I'll go ahead and chamfer this other side as well. So I'll right click to repeat the chamfer surface command. And we'll go those two together, those two together, those two, and those two. So now I can look at this again, and like I said, it's going to take a little bit of cleaning up. And so part of the goal today is to practice the idea of how do you look at an object, how do you understand what's happening in 3 dimensions, and then clean things up. So I need some lines to help me trim what's happening. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to the Polyline tool. I'm going to snap right to that corner. I'll come up and snap right to that corner. I'll come down and snap here, and I'll come back on itself. That's given me a triangle that is right in the corner. I can now use the trim command. I'll go to edit and then trim. I could type trim, or I could choose the trim tool. And I'm using that triangle as my cutting object. And I can now get rid of these extra pieces. And sometimes you have to orbit around to kind of see what your extra pieces are of surfaces. Oh, I've got that piece to get rid of. And there we go. Now that I'm done, I'll press enter. And we can look here, and you can see that that has been cleaned up. I'm going to repeat that over here. Same thing. Polyline. Draw the triangle. I'm going to select the triangle, and I'm going to go to trim. I'll get rid of the extra pieces like that. Looks pretty good. We'll move over and do this over here. So when I get over here, it suddenly gets a lot harder to zoom. You guys see how it wants to zoom away? It wants to center back over here. It doesn't want to center over here. So it makes working very challenging. So what I'm going to encourage you to do is start with the polyline and go ahead and draw your triangle. You should be able to zoom in and get close enough to draw that triangle. After you have the triangle, we're going to select it, and then we're going to recenter our view and to that object. So I'm going to type Z for zoom, followed by S for selected. It's right there, selected, and then enter. And now our view is centered around that triangular object that I just drew. So we're no longer trying to zoom somewhere else. We're not trying to orbit around some other place. It makes it really easy to work with. I'll go ahead with it selected and type trim, and we'll get rid of these extra pieces like that. I'll press enter to finish. Now over here, same thing. I need to draw that triangle, so we'll go ahead and draw the triangle. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll select it and go back to the trim command, and we'll trim off. And that was not the right piece here. We'll trim off these other pieces like that. So now that I've corrected all of those corners, I need to fill them in with a surface. I have several options for doing that. I could go back to my 3 or 4 corner points, this one, and I could snap, snap, and snap, followed by enter, and that would fill it in. Alternatively, I could select that triangle that I worked with right there, and I could use the patch command. So I could go up to surface and then patch, and we can just do it at 2 by 2. It doesn't really matter. That's just a little bit cleaner, and that'll fill in that surface as well. Different options for basically creating the same thing. It doesn't matter how you end up doing it. So I've done this side, and I've done that side, but I haven't paid any attention to what's happening down below. So here's a good opportunity to see how I've adjusted this. When I created the surfaces on the end here, I did a separate surface right here so that when I do the chamfer, it'll chamfer to this surface here cleanly. If I did it this way, let me show you an example here. So if I did one surface like this, when I go to chamfer it, oops, just realized that I'm just going to illustrate my point this way. When I go to chamfer these two pieces, there to there, I'm going to get really funky results down here because I have different surfaces trying to chamfer. It's not clean. So instead, I went ahead and I created this as a separate little surface, which will allow me to use the chamfer surface command to take this and put those together and see how that corner meets really nice and clean. So I've chamfered that surface. That's good. I'm going to go back to my chamfer surface command again, and I'll chamfer this and this together. Okay, that's pretty good. And I could continue my way around, chamfer this and this, and chamfer this and this. Now, if we zoom in right here, we'll see that I actually have a problem. See that little gap that's right in there? So technically, this is a problem because it's no longer a nice, clean object. Now, if I zoomed out and I did a rendering from here, could you tell? No, you can't tell. So you have to pay attention when you're modeling things to what level of detail is appropriate or what level of detail matters. So if I'm only ever going to zoom this from here, this distance, the fact that those two pieces don't align is not the end of the world. If I'm going to 3D print it, the fact that those two pieces don't align does matter. The 3D print will fail. So we need to correct that. So it's not a bad idea to get in the habit of making corrections when you see these sorts of things, but I like to point out that if you're not intending to 3D print it, you can get away with some things that don't quite match up right. So we're going to go, it's good practice for us today anyway, to deal with this corner right here, match up with that corner right there. And so we have some options. The first option would be to go ahead and draw a line from this corner right there down to that point. You see that line tapers a little bit. We could then use this line to trim that surface that's hanging past right there. So now that surface lines up. We could delete this chamfer and then go back to our surface from 3 or 4 corner points and fill this in like that. And so technically speaking, this surface, it doesn't really matter that it has a little bit of a twist to it. The alternative to that is I can use a command called untrim. So you guys are familiar with trim. Untrim is exactly what you think it does. It gets rid of a trim. So I'm going to go ahead and type untrim. It says select edge to untrim. I'm going to untrim that edge, that diagonal. Once that's done, I'll go ahead and press enter, and I'll select the surface. And I'll come over here and I'll turn my edit points on right there. It's this option right here, so object control points. So I untrimmed first, then I went to show object control points right here. I then have a control point right there that controls this surface. I can move that control point using transform and then move. I can go from that point right up to that point. And I've modified this. So it's just a different strategy. I'm getting to the same place. I'll press enter to finish. Oops, sorry, let me hit escape twice to finish. There we go. Now this surface and this surface still overlap a little bit. If I zoom in on it, you can see there's that overlap. So we need to do a trim. I'll come back into trim. This here is my cutting object. I'll press enter to get rid of that little extra piece along the edge. So what method you use to actually solve those problems is up to you, but I like to kind of walk through a variety of strategies. So you don't have to chamfer this line right here, but you should chamfer all the way up, over, and around. Likewise, these should always be chamfered. You don't have to chamfer this outside edge, though you can if you want. If you did, there and there, you'd end up with that same triangle that you did up on top. So we'd go through and we connect from here to there, and back to there. Use that triangle as a trim for these objects there and there. Remember the zoom followed by S for selected to recenter your view to help you see, oh, there's the pieces that I need to get rid of, there and there. And now those are clean, and we could patch that resulting piece with another little surface. So if you were going to chamfer the bottom, but again, that's not required. Okay? So the purpose today is to go through and to practice with all of these points. That's really my goal. You're going to start to understand where you can not have to model. I would encourage you to model the whole thing, work on all the corners. It's going to give you a lot of practice. You have plenty of time today to work on that. If, however, I were drawing it, I would start right here, and I would draw, there's my 36, there's my 4, there's my at -2, -36. There. I'd go down by my 6. I'd go at 30, comma -6. At 30, comma -6. I'm just failing miserably at this. At 30. There it is. And I'd come back to right there and right there. So notice I've drawn just half of this shape. I then rotate 3D. My axis of rotation is still the same, so I could stand that piece up right there. Then I would offset by, instead of 48, I'd offset by a distance of 24. I'd take these two pieces and I'd loft them. I'm going to go ahead and explode so that I can deselect. I don't need that. And then we'll go ahead and join because I don't need that little end piece there. And then I need to fill in. Same strategy for filling these in. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you see I've built exactly 1/4 of this shape. I then go in and do my chamfers. Sorry. Chamfer surface. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Now that I've done that, I'll clean it up. So I'll draw my triangle. I'll take my triangle here, zoom, and then S for selected. I'll type trim, and I'll get rid of those extra pieces that I don't need. There they are. I'm done, and I'll patch the remaining piece, right like that. Same thing over here with my triangle. 1, 2, 3, and 4. I will then trim. And then patch. And that one's fixed. Same issue down here. So I'm going to go ahead and use the untrim method. So I'll type untrim with that edge. I'll select that shape. I'll turn on my object control points, and I'll move that little point to right there. Then I can go ahead and use this as a trim for that surface right there. So I've gone ahead and I've done all of that on just a quarter of the shape. I can take that quarter and then I can mirror it. So I'll go up to transform and then mirror. If I can find mirror, there it is. And we'll mirror it first like that. I'll take the whole shape and I'll mirror it that way, and I've now created. Today, I would encourage you to build the whole thing out. Don't worry about using my method where you use quarters, but I wanted to have you guys aware that there are efficiencies when you model. And so training your brain to think. So, step 10, I'm asking plane. Excellent. So I have my infinite plane. I have my objects themselves. Sometimes it makes sense in the layers here to create a layer for infinite plane. And so I'll change that onto the infinite plane layer. Here we go. And that will allow me to lock that layer so I can't accidentally select it. Sometimes that's a good idea after you've created it. OK, so now I need to go through and I need a basic directional light. So I'll use that box method that we did last class where I draw a box. And then I use my directional light tool. And I'll snap from this corner to that corner so that I have my directional light pointing down at my objects. Then we'll go ahead and assign materials. So let me open up that V-Ray asset editor right here. I'm going to go to materials. I'm going to expand to the left to see the default materials that are loaded in. Let's look at concrete here. I'm going to do the concrete flooring. We'll drag it over into my materials list. Then I can right click on concrete flooring and say apply material. This time I'm going to do it to a layer, and I'll put it on the default layer because that's where my objects are. So all of these are going to have that concrete material applied to them. Now that that's the case, I can zoom in just a little bit. We'll once again open that V-Ray asset editor. I can go over to my settings and I can confirm that the settings are set correctly. The one thing that I'm going to have to change is the environment. I want that background to be more like white. So let me switch to there. There we go. There's my slate blue background. Excellent. The rest of these options should all be fine, so I'm not going to worry about those just yet. We'll go ahead and close those, and then we'll open up a render. So I'll click on the little teapot here. And we'll let that render. Next class, we're going to start building some more. And using several other commands. Today is about that chamfer surface and working through details, learning to zoom and zoom selected to change your orientation and to change what you're zooming. Now that this is done, I'll click on the little save icon, and then I'll choose to save it into my folder for today. It would go into, where are we, 205. It would go into here. And I'll go ahead and save it. That'll be the image that I then post. Okay? So at this point, I'm going to turn you guys loose. Remember, it's about learning and practicing. So the more you practice, the better. That's why I would do all the corners and work your way around. Try both methods for fixing that bottom when you have that gap in there. It'll help you learn, again, to problem solve when you're a little bit further along building more complicated objects. Are there any questions? No? I'll let you guys start working.